Just a lot of great decisions that make for really great racing. I love it. I'm glad it's back.
Yeah, I am too. Al, you were going to add something?
Actually, I wasn't.
Well, tell me about the other course.
Well, maybe I'll tell you about my first Cove Island course.
Why don't you tell us about your first Cove Island course?
Right. 1972, like most of you. And I remember we had a good run sailing on a boat my dad had designed, and we were actually doing pretty well on a boat that turned out really wasn't very good. We get up near the island, and I guess my dad had just heard enough of his 18-year-old son explaining to him that he really didn't know much about sailing. So he went down below, and about 5 minutes later he came back up with a $20 bill and a life jacket and handed them to me. That kind of leads me into the one of the things, the real values of this race in my mind is the ability to sail with families. And everybody at this table, and I'm sure most of you in the room, do a lot of sailing in this race with your family. You know, I grew up sailing with my father. My son's been sailing the last few races with me, and you know, quite honestly, that's way more important to me than winning. Not that we don't try, and that, but it's a true joy to sail with your family.
Indeed.
You know, Ted, and adding on that subject, that when I look back, I've had a lot of good stretches. I mean, obviously you can't win that many races without, you know, doing it on a regular basis. But I only had one really bad stretch where maybe I went 10 years and won one Mackinac race. And that was, you know, years ago, 20-some years ago, Al and I started the North Loft in Detroit. And you know the North model of sailing pros and getting out. I spent a decade sailing with basically whoever was writing me the biggest check. And you know, we didn't have any success at all. And before that, sailing with families and friends had great success. And it's continued with that. And I think a big part of doing well is having fun, having the camaraderie, and you wonder, well, how can you put a value on that? What, I mean, wouldn't it be if you had great sailors, you'd do better? It doesn't seem to be. You know, I think that the effort's there, the looseness is there, the fun's there. When it's more enjoyable, somehow the results get better. And so, I mean, certainly I was proof you could not buy a win, because anybody who paid for me certainly didn't do very good.
You're right, it is a game and it's supposed to be fun. And that's a big part of the sport. It's a lot more fun. Would anyone like to add to Bob's analysis of the Cove Island course before we go to the other course? Pete?
You know, I have one memory, or, you know, one predominant wind pattern that usually what happens, and I'd like to hear everybody else with on the panel here. But typically what we have done when the wind has been forecasted to come out of the west northwest and blow up a little bit on you, you head to Canada. And that is typically, and then you get over there on the Canadian shore and tack over and come in the Mackinac has typically been better than at that time heading south over back to Michigan. It's what I can recall from the
Absolutely, that, you know, when I was talking about going south, this is early. Once you get by the docks, they're going upwind. You can't get far enough right. Yeah.
And it's not nice to be east of the Ducks.
I mean, just go right in the detour. Just go right in the detour.
Is somebody else going to add something here?
Oh, I'll just say on the first leg, we always found out west of the rum is always, not always, but mostly favored. And then, as I said, we'd always just tack up along the reefs on the northern side. That's how you doing that heavy air.
Yep.
Well, even in light air, there's great thermals along that Canadian shore up there too. It's a great place to be if the wind poops out on you.
Before we move on to other aspects of the race, I think one final thing is when you wind out of those western quadrants, it tends to go right. So it only makes sense that once you clear the Ducks, if you're sailing upwind, that you want to get north, because you'll be tacking over sometime before you get there.
Exactly. Exactly. Let's talk about the Thunder Bay course, which is new, what, 2-3 years ago now. It's sort of the You know, it's sort of a short course with vitamins. Who would like to talk about the strategy for that course?
Well, I've never lost on that course, so I like that course.
Right, we had it last year, that's right.
You know, I have to tell you, personally, you know, you're supposed to be a good ambassador for the club and everything, but that course is a joke.
That's how you really
You know, when you look at race courses and you want to be a great race, you got to have some type of challenge to it. Our shore course is a tremendous challenge. And the first part of this race is a bit like our shore course, so we can talk about that. The Cove Island course is literally a classic course in that it makes you make choices of where you want to be on the lake. It gives you the various points of sail. It is really good. This course has nothing to offer, but I guess if you're going to sail on it, you got to go to the best places you can. And that
Just don't hold anything back here. Let us know what you think.
you know, we talked about the fun, and one more thing about the course, and I'll tell you how to sail it, but why in the world would you want to go out in the middle of the lake here, where there's nothing to see up there on a weather buoy, when you could be sailing along some of the most beautiful coastline in the world? I mean, would you rather look at pine trees, for 12 miles more or something like that, that you know, you've ruined 50 miles of sailing. And I can tell you, I echoed all those sentiments of the board, and they didn't think much of my ideas. So, that's fine. So how do you get there? Let's look at the bottom part of the race course. One of the things that you notice is that you're extremely close to the Michigan shore. So this whole idea, do I need to be out? Do I need to be in? And unfortunately, on this course is a course where you really can get crushed and get out of the game by Saturday afternoon. And so that Greg mentioned something earlier about the importance of staying engaged, giving yourself a chance. I think that you got to sail from the start to Harbor Beach very conservatively. And because there is going to be a huge difference in how much wind there is 2 miles offshore, 6 miles offshore, 12, 18, there's going to be bands of it. Sometimes it's going to be good to be inshore, sometimes it's going to be good to be offshore, and the problem is that you could sail 8 hours into this race and easily have lost 10 miles. Makes it very difficult with a long ways to go. So we'll follow the same rules. In the middle of the day, if the breeze is out of the westerly component, southwesterly component, heavy odds there's going to be more air on shore. Now, just because there's more air on shore, you have to think about, well, what am I going to do? Because when I start, I'm still going to be along that shore at night. Now, I'll give you an example of 2 years ago when we sailed with Frank Kern, and we didn't need any sophisticated instruments or weather mapping or such. That the fact of the matter is that we had high pressure coming out of Saginaw Bay. You knew it was going to be light, so now it's going to be important. What are the thermals going to do? The breeze was northeast, and if you're inshore, you're going to have a westerly thermal. What it mean? You're going to have no shore or no wind. So we went off at the start, and we talked about that by the time we needed to be offshore and we wanted to target a minimum of 14 miles offshore, that it meant that we had to sail 2/3 of the time on port tack and 1/3 of the time on starboard tack. Now the problem was that starboard tack was slightly favored. So most of the boats were sailing on that, but we accepted the fact that somehow we got to spend 2/3. So we tried to bring the best 2/3. If ever we could get a little lift on port, we'd get on it, because the whole race was going to be that night. Now, as it turns out, ourselves and a group of other 30-some boats sailed in 10 knots of breeze all night. Mr. Kraft was there with us, and that, lo and behold, you were there, yeah, Greg was there, and you know, you're starting to get a little bit of a trend here. And Pete was there, and you know, and the fact of the matter is that it was the key to the race. Now, you know, when you're sailing 40-footers and you're beating the 70-footers, up to that bozo mark we talked